I still believed in us when I heard her key turn in the lock. That sound, the soft, metallic click of our front door, had been the happiest sound of my week. 7 days, 168 hours of heating up leftovers alone, sleeping on my side of a bed that felt enormous without her, and talking to our cat, Biscuit, as though he might actually answer back. 7 days of missing Katie so profoundly that I had actually rehearsed what I would say when she walked through that door. I was going to say, "You have no idea how empty this house is without you." I had even bought flowers, pale yellow tulips, her favorite. They sat in a mason jar on the kitchen counter, still bright, still reaching toward the window like small golden hands. She had been in Boston for a full week, a corporate conference, she'd said. Something about regional sales strategy and Q3 projections. I hadn't pressed for details because I trusted her completely. The way you trust the ground beneath your feet, without thought, without doubt, simply because it has never once failed you. I heard her footsteps in the hallway. I straightened my shirt. I smiled. And then she walked in. Something was wrong. I couldn't name it immediately. It was nothing so obvious as a bruise or a tear or an accusation. It was something far quieter and far more devastating than any of those things. It was in the way she looked at me, or rather, the way she didn't. Her eyes swept the kitchen the way a person scans a hotel lobby, politely, briefly, looking for nothing in particular and expecting even less. "Hey," she said. Not Michael, not baby, not "God, I missed you." Just, "Hey." "Hey yourself," I replied, stepping forward to wrap my arms around her. She let me. That was the word for it. Let. Her arms came up, but they moved like they were following instructions from somewhere far away. Her chin rested on my shoulder for exactly 3 seconds. I know because I counted. The way you count thunderclaps after lightning when you're trying to measure how close the storm is. And then she stepped back. "I'm exhausted," she said, already pulling her suitcase toward the bedroom. "I made dinner," I called after her. She paused just long enough to say, "I'll eat later. I just want to shower." I stood in the kitchen with my yellow tulips and my carefully heated pasta and the quiet, ridiculous ache in my chest, telling myself what every person in love tells themselves when the first cold wind blows. She's just tired. Give her space. Everything is fine. But everything was not fine. By the next evening, I knew it the way animals know weather, in the bones before a single cloud appears. She had been home for 24 hours, and we had exchanged perhaps 40 words. She sat across from me at dinner, pushing food around her plate with the absent focus of someone waiting for a bus. And I watched her and thought, "Who are you? Where did my wife go?" Then she cleared her throat. She set down her fork. She looked at me, and for the first time since she'd come home, she really looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes was not love. It was not even indifference. It was worse. It was decision. "Michael," she said, "I've been thinking. I think we should just be friends." The room didn't spin. The earth didn't crack open. That's the terrible thing about the worst moments of your life. They don't announce themselves with dramatic music. They arrive quietly, in ordinary kitchens, over plates of cooling pasta. "Friends," I repeated. "It knows it sounds strange. You're my wife, Katie." She exhaled slowly, like someone who had practiced this exact exhale. "That's the problem, Michael. I don't feel it anymore. The connection, the spark." She paused. "Honestly, you've gotten boring. You're not the same man I married. You're predictable now, and I need something more, something exciting." Boring. The word landed somewhere between my ribs and did not leave. I had worked 60-hour weeks to pay off our mortgage early. I had learned to cook her favorite Thai dishes from YouTube videos at midnight. I had remembered every anniversary, every small celebration, every quiet sadness she'd ever shared with me. I had loved her with everything I had, completely, daily, without reservation. And I was boring. I looked at the yellow tulips on the counter behind her. In that moment, I hated myself for buying them. "Is there someone else?" I asked.
She flinched. It was fast, a single involuntary tightening around her eyes, and then it was gone, smoothed over with a practiced little shake of her head. "No, of course not." She said it looking directly at me. She was lying. I just didn't have the proof yet. "I want you to understand something before I continue. I am not a dramatic man. I have never been the kind of person who makes scenes at restaurants or punches walls or demands answers at 2 in the morning. I was raised to be steady, to be measured, to think before I speak. What I am about to tell you is what steadiness looks like when it's bleeding from the inside." The days that followed her announcement were the strangest of my life, because nothing on the surface changed, and yet everything had changed. The way a house looks exactly the same before you discover it's built on a crack. Katie moved through our home like a woman who had already left it. She started waking earlier than me, always dressed and out of the bathroom before I could say good morning. She began wearing things I hadn't seen before. A deep green silk blouse I didn't recognize, boots with a heel she'd never owned, a perfume that wasn't the vanilla and cedar scent I had fallen in love with 7 years ago. This new one was sharper, more urgent, like it was trying to get somewhere. She came home late on Tuesday. She came home later on Thursday. On Friday, she didn't come home until after 11, and when I asked, calmly, carefully, where she'd been, she said, "Out with work friends," and walked past me to the bathroom without waiting for my response. Her phone never left her hand. I would enter a room and she would flip it face down on instinct, the same way you cover a flame against the wind. I noticed the brightness of her screen when she scrolled late at night, her face lit up in the dark beside me, and sometimes, I would hear the softest sound, almost inaudible, a barely there breath of a laugh. And I would lie perfectly still with my eyes closed and feel my heart breaking as quietly as I possibly could. I told myself, get evidence before you do anything. Don't act on feeling, act on fact. So I waited. And then one Wednesday morning, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she stepped into the shower. I heard the water start. I heard the pipes groan. I stood at the counter with my coffee mug and looked at her phone for a long moment. I am not proud of what I did next, but I am not ashamed of it either. I picked it up. The screen was already lit, a notification had just arrived, and the name above the message stopped all the breath in my body. Lucas. The message was 4 words and a number. Last evening was everything wonderful. When is the next? I put the phone down. I walked to the kitchen window. I looked out at our backyard, at the garden Katie and I had planted together the spring after we got married, at the little stone path I had laid myself one hot August weekend, at the oak tree with the bird feeder I had hung at exactly the height she requested. I stood there for a very long time. And then something extraordinary happened inside me, something I hadn't expected and couldn't fully explain. The grief was there, enormous, oceanic, but underneath it, or perhaps alongside it, something else was rising, something cool and clear and purposeful. Clarity, because now I understood everything. The Boston trip, the new clothes, the disappearing at night, the speech about friendship and boredom and needing something more. None of it was about me being dull or predictable or less than what she needed. It was about him. The just friends speech wasn't an ending, it was a strategy. If I had agreed, if I had nodded and accepted her reframing and played the sad, bewildered husband, she could have walked away clean. She could have said, "We just grew apart. Michael agreed it wasn't working." She could have stepped into Lucas's arms with her conscience neatly folded and tucked away. And she had no idea that I had just seen behind the curtain. I finished my coffee. I rinsed my mug. I placed it in the rack to dry. And I began to plan. There is a particular kind of strength that only comes to a person who has nothing left to lose. I didn't know that until I felt it. It is very quiet, it is very cold, and it is absolutely, terrifyingly precise. I called Matei Doyle on a Thursday afternoon from the parking lot of a grocery store 2 miles from our house with the engine running so Katie wouldn't hear me if she happened to call. Matei was more than my college roommate. He was a family law attorney with 18 years of experience and the kind of calm, unsentimental competence that makes you deeply grateful in a crisis and mildly unsettling at dinner parties.
"Tell me everything," he said. So I did. The trip, the speech, the phone, Lucas, all of it. There was a pause on his end. Then, "Are you still in the house?" "Yes." "Good. Don't leave. Don't change your behavior. Don't tip her off." He paused again. "And Michael, I'm sorry. You deserve better than this." Those 6 words nearly undid me. I sat in that parking lot for a while after we hung up, watching people push their carts in and out of the store, living their ordinary lives, and I thought, a week ago, I was one of them. A week ago, I had yellow tulips on my counter and a wife coming home. But grief, I was learning, is a luxury you can't always afford in the middle of a war. I did 3 things in the next 2 weeks, and I did all of them in absolute silence. First, I opened a private bank account at a different institution and began transferring my portion of our joint savings. Nothing illegal. Matej had been very clear about what was mine to move and what was not. I did it carefully, methodically, the way I did everything, and I did not lose a single night's sleep over it. Second, I hired Dylan Hayes. Dylan was a private investigator Matej recommended, a quiet, competent man of about 50 who wore plain clothes and drove unremarkable cars and had the professional affect of a man who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing since approximately 1987. I met him once, briefly, in the parking structure of a shopping center across town. I gave him Katie's car description, her schedule, and Lucas's first name. He gave me his rate and his card. "How long?" I asked. "Depends on how active they are. Give me 10 days. He needed 7. Third, I became the perfect husband. This, I will confess, was the hardest part, not because it required effort, but because it required performing a love I was in the process of folding away forever, like putting a treasured coat into a box, knowing you will never wear it again. I cooked dinner. I asked about her day. When Katie said she was going out, I smiled and said, "Have a good time." I did not check the time when Katie came home. I did not look at her phone. I did not flinch when she sat beside me on the couch and scrolled through messages in the amber glow of the television light. One evening, I think it was a Tuesday, around 9, Katie looked up from her phone and said, almost experimentally, "You seem better." "Do I?" "Less intense." She studied me. "Maybe the friends thing is actually working out for you." I held her gaze for a moment, then I smiled, the kind of smile that shows teeth without showing anything else, and said, "You know, I think you might be right, Katie. Maybe we should just be friends." Something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. The wariness that had been living behind her eyes since she got home from Boston softened. She thought she had won. She had no idea that every day she was out, Dylan Hayes was photographing hotel parking lots in the east side of the city. She had no idea that Matej Doyle had already drafted the papers. She had no idea that the man sitting beside her on that couch, asking politely about her day, smiling his careful smile, was not the boring, predictable husband she had written off. He was the man who was about to change everything. Every story has a moment, one single irreversible moment where everything that came before becomes perfectly, horribly clear. This was mine. It was a Friday night, nearly 1 in the morning. I had been sitting in the living room for 3 hours with the lights dimmed and a cup of tea gone cold beside me. Not because I was dramatic, not because I wanted to create an atmosphere, but because I had been waiting for this specific moment for 2 weeks, and I wanted to be awake for every second of it. I heard her car first, the soft hum of it in the driveway, then the cut of the engine, then the pause that told me she was checking herself in the rearview mirror, then the front door. Katie came in with her heels in her hand and her hair loosened from whatever style it had started the evening in. Her lipstick was gone. Her eyes were bright in the sharp, reckless way of a person who is living a story they believe will never have consequences. She saw me sitting there, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Surprise. Maybe even the ghost of guilt. Then she recovered. She actually smirked. "It's late. Haven't you gone to bed yet?" "I was waiting for you." She set her heels by the door with a soft thud. "You don't have to do that, Michael. We're just friends now, remember? Friends don't wait up for each other."
She said it lightly, almost playfully, like she was testing whether she could make this somehow charming. I said nothing. I stood. I crossed to the coffee table. I picked up the manila envelope I had placed there 90 minutes earlier and walked to the dining table and set it down between us. She stared at it. "What's that?" "Open it." The word open must have hit something in her, because for a moment she didn't move. She just looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face made the smirk disappear. She opened it. I had organized everything carefully, because that is the kind of person I am. I do not do things halfway. At the top, the divorce papers, already signed on my end, with Matei Doyle's firm letterhead. Beneath that, 37 screenshots of messages between Katie and Lucas, printed in clear 12-point font with dates and timestamps included. Every endearment, every hotel suggestion, every message that proved what the two of them had been doing since, I nearly laughed at the precision of Dylan's investigation, since 4 months before her Boston trip. The trip itself had apparently been largely fictional. She had spent 3 of those 7 nights not at a conference hotel, but at a boutique property 20 minutes from our house. $48 a night, paid with a credit card I hadn't known existed. The hotel receipts were next, then the photographs. Dylan Hayes was very thorough. I watched her turn through them. I watched the color leave her face the way evening leaves the sky, gradually, then all at once. "You," she started. Her voice had lost its shape. "You went behind my back." "Behind your back," I said, and I was surprised by how level my own voice was, how clear and unshaking, like water in still glass. "Katie, you've been running a second life for 4 months. You stood in our kitchen and told me I was boring so that I would agree to end our marriage on your terms. You wanted me to be the sad, confused husband who quietly accepted the situation while you walked away clean." I paused. I chose not to be that man. "Michael, please," she pressed her hands flat on the table. "Listen to me. Lucas doesn't mean anything. He was just, I was lonely. I felt like we'd lost something and I didn't know how to tell you. And he was just, I know what he was." I said it quietly. "And I know what you chose." "I chose wrong. I know that now." Her voice cracked. Actual tears formed at the corners of her eyes, and some small, foolish part of me, the part that bought yellow tulips, the part that loved her for 7 years without reservation, felt the grief move through me like a tide. But tides recede. "Please," she whispered, "we can fix this. I'll end it. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't do this." I looked at my wife, at this woman I had promised forever to, this woman who had stood beside me and said "I do" on a perfect June afternoon with her mother crying in the front row, and I felt something release inside my chest. Not hate, not even anger, something more final than both of those things. Completion. Like the last page of a book you knew was ending but couldn't put down. "Katie," I said softly, "you wanted to be free. I'm giving you exactly that. I want to tell you something about dignity, not the kind that comes from expensive suits or elegant speeches, the kind that comes from surviving the thing you thought would kill you and walking away from it with your eyes open." She screamed. Not immediately. First came the begging, the desperate, reaching, disorganized kind that has no strategy behind it, only raw panic. She grabbed my arm. She said my name 11 times in 60 seconds. I counted. I don't know why I counted, only that some part of my brain had stepped outside of the moment and was watching it with the strange, muted calm of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for it to be over. "The house," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "Per the agreement Matei drafted, you keep the house. The mortgage is paid. You'll be comfortable." "I don't want the house. I want—" "The joint account will be split evenly. That's fair. More than fair if we're being accurate. I paused. The car is yours. I've already arranged to have my name removed from the title next week. Michael, stop! I've arranged to stay with Matei until I find a place. I'll be out by Monday. Everything I need is already packed. This was the moment she understood it was real. Not a bluff, not a performance, not the opening move in a negotiation. I saw it arrive in her eyes. The genuine, gutting recognition that I had planned every detail, that the man she had decided was boring and predictable had been quietly, patiently, and irreversibly dismantling their shared life while she was busy building another one. She sank into a chair, and then she did something I hadn't expected. She wept. Not the performance tears that had come before, real ones, the ugly, chest-shaking kind, the kind that come from a place a person can't fake. And I want to be honest with you, because this story deserves honesty. It hurt to watch. 7 years of loving a person does not evaporate in a single decisive evening. Part of me, some small aching corner of my heart that I would need months to fully attend to, wanted to cross the room, to put my hand on her shoulder, to say we can try. But I knew what that would cost me.
I had seen the messages. I had seen the photographs. I had watched her smirk at me from the doorway with her heels in her hand and Lucas's fingerprints all over her evening. Some doors, once they've been walked through, cannot be walked back through. Not because of pride, but because of truth. I picked up my coat from the hook by the door, the same hook I had installed 3 years ago on a rainy Saturday afternoon, while Katie painted the hallway a color called Morning Mist. We had argued about the color. I had wanted something warmer. She won. I'd grown to love it. I ran my hand along the door frame for a moment, just a moment. Then I opened the door. Behind me, Katie was still crying, still searching for the version of me who would turn around. I thought about the yellow tulips. I thought about the bird feeder in the backyard. I thought about the morning I'd carried her over the threshold of this house because she'd laughed and dared me to, and I had laughed too, and we had stumbled through the door together and collapsed onto the bare hardwood floor before we even owned a single piece of furniture. I thought about it all. And then I stepped outside. The night air was cool and sharp, and I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing it in. The street was empty. The neighborhood was quiet the way it only gets after midnight. Not an absence of sound exactly, but a deepening of it, like the world had let out a long, slow breath. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. I have read stories like this one, maybe you have too, where the betrayed person walks away feeling triumphant, vindicated, righteous. And perhaps that was somewhere in me too, in some small sealed chamber I wasn't ready to open. But mostly what I felt, standing on that porch on that cool night, was released. Like a fist that had been clenched for months had slowly, finally opened. I began to sleep through the night again. I never once regretted walking out that door. People ask me sometimes, not many people, but a few who know the full story, whether I could have handled it differently, whether I should have confronted her earlier, or forgiven her, or tried harder. And I understand why they ask. People who haven't been there want to believe that love is always savable, that every broken thing can be mended with enough patience and willingness. I believed that once. It is a beautiful thing to believe. But there is also a kind of love that respects itself enough to recognize when it has been made into a fool. And there's a kind of strength, not anger, not pride, but something quieter and more durable that comes from choosing your own dignity over someone else's comfort. The most powerful thing I ever did in my marriage was not the flowers or the dinners or the anniversary surprises or the 7 years of faithful, wholehearted love. The most powerful thing was the night I placed an envelope on the dining room table and walked out of my own house with my coat over my arm and my head perfectly level. Not because it was easy, because it was right.
And that, I have found, is the only revenge worth having. Not the shouting, not the scene, not the satisfaction of watching someone else crumble. Just the quiet, unshakable knowledge that when the moment came, you chose yourself. You closed the door, you didn't look back, and somewhere in the distance, faint at first, and then a little clearer every morning, you heard something you hadn't expected to hear so soon. Your own life beginning again.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.